Well, welcome all you wiretappers out there. I have a kind of a special and interesting show today, I think. I did a real deep dive on a little known subject, but this is special because I want to take this opportunity to ask you guys if you just subscribe to my YouTube channel. It's kind of an ego thing, but I'm sitting here at 4,800 subscribers and I get a little something. I get like I can tag people, or I don't know, there's some kind of a thing like that on there. But just for my own ego, I want to go over the 5,000 mark if I can. So if you're not subscribed, you want to support the channel, even though you're an audio guy and you listen to all my listen to audio podcasts, which that's all I ever listen to. I like to listen to it on my phone. But get on YouTube on the Gangland Wire channel and subscribe. And then after you subscribe, then if you don't, unless you got notifications on, then you only get notified a little thing on your phone, on the screen of your phone, little notification. Gangland Wire has a new video up. Of course, you may want to know that. You may like the video after you watch it, but a lot of you guys, and I know I like to listen to them. But this story today is the 4 reasons that Gotti won his first big RICO trial. And really, that's when he became known as a Teflon Don. In 1987, in the Eastern District of New York, they launched a racketeering case called the Della Croce prosecution, because Neil Della Croce was the underboss, and he was like the target, and under Della Croce was the Gotti crew. So the John Gotti, his brother Gene, and some other guys in the Gotti crew were part of this RICO racketeering prosecution case. And there was a former tax prosecutor named Diane Giacalone who was assigned the lead counsel. She was from the neighborhood, from Ozone Park, kind of like Jenny from the hood. Well, she was Diane from the hood. She grew up in Queens and went to Our Lady of Wisdom Academy and walked by the Ravenite every once in a while, is my understanding. This will come back and later in this story about her as a young girl walking by the Ravenite. But she was one of the most experienced trial lawyers in the Eastern District. Now, the Southern District was ran by Rudy Giuliani at the time, and they were getting ready to go to trial on the commission case. They were working on the commission case. And the Eastern District, New York, is not quite the glamour district. But there was a new young prosecutor named John Gleason who was assigned to second chair of Mrs. Giacalone. A little bit about Gleason. He had been a lawyer for a firm called Cravath, which was a successful private firm in New York. He had applied to the Southern District because they were the big duck under Giuliani, but Giuliani rejected him. He then applied for the Eastern District, and the U.S. attorney in the Eastern District was Raymond Deary, who hired him. And this is the same Raymond Deary, and coincidence of all coincidences, he's a special master in the current Mar-a-Lago case. Now, Gleason, and I took most of my details from Gleason's book. He wrote one called The Gotti Wars, Taking Down America's Most Notorious Mobster. And I'll have links to that. And you'll see I'll have an image of the cover of it on the video here. Now, in that book, Gleason's kind of an interesting guy, and he tells about his very first appearance as a new federal prosecutor in the Eastern District. And he's assigned just a simple little bond hearing for a woman who had forged a $300 money order. I don't even know why that was a federal case and then federal court, but it was. And so he doesn't know what he's doing. When you're new on the job, you don't know what you're doing, right? And so he asked another assistant U.S. attorney. He said, "Well, how much bond should I ask for?" And the guy said, "Just ask for $20,000. He didn't know that. He goes back up in front, to the judge and called his case. Her public defender probably asked for be released on her own recognizance. And judge looks at Gleason, says, "Counselor." And he says, "Well, I want $20,000 bond." The judge heard that, and he kind of does a double take, and he says loudly, "This is a $300 forgery, and you tell me you want a $20,000 bond on this lady." And Gleason says that he said, "I really didn't know what to say. I'd never, I didn't have any courtroom experience." He said, "I turned around and pointed back at that assistant U.S. attorney and said, I don't, that guy back there told me to ask for $20,000. And the judge says, again, loudly, get me somebody up here who knows what they're doing. And, and he released her on her own recognizance, which was pretty much what you'll do in a case like that. So a few months after he got into the U.S. Attorney's Office, Ms. Giacalone assigned him just to that case, and she was a lead trial, and he was going to second chair it. And he started answering different defense motions and reviewing all FBI reports and wiretap transcripts in the what they call the Della Croce prosecution. And so to let you know the kind of the timeline of events here during this time. It's a really important time in New York City in prosecution of the mob in New York City, and especially the Gambino family, but all five families, because February 25th, 1985, the commission trial starts. And that's under Rudy Giuliani and against the bosses of the five families in the Southern District. The Gambino boss, Paul Castellano, and underboss Neil Della Croce are defendants in that trial too. March 28th, 1985, just a month later, poor old Della Croce, he gets prosecuted along with John Gotti and Gene Gotti and the Gotti crew on a RICO prosecution. And they'll be defendants in that one. 8 months later, December 2nd, 1985, Della Croce dies of natural causes. December 5th, just a few days later, the Della Croce wake is held and Paul Castellano doesn't show up. Now, Gotti uses this as kind of an excuse, saying he disrespected the underboss, and, who knows, there was a lot more at play. I think we don't need to go into that part of the story. We know a lot. I put out a story not too long ago about why Gotti felt he needed to kill Castellano, and it wasn't because he didn't go to that wake. December 16th, 11 days after the Della Croce wake, Gotti sits on the street with Sammy the Bull and watches several of his underlings murder Castellano as he enters Sparks Steakhouse on the street. One of the most famous mob hits of modern times. Maybe the last mob hit. I'm not sure. The Della Croce case in the Eastern District. The Della Croce case in the Eastern District now becomes the Gotti case, as Gotti starts off as like part of a trio that's going to oversee the Gambino family, but he is, for all intents and purposes, the new boss of the Gambino crime family. Now, this prosecution will center around Gotti's Bergen Hunt and Fish Club in Queens. Along with Gotti, they had Gene Gotti, John Cornelia, Della Croce's son, Armand, who everybody called Buddy. And there's another non-Italian named Willie Boy Johnson. There was three other guys that were part of another family, and Lenny DiMaria and Nicky Carozzo. He had a crew over in the Carnesi section of Brooklyn. I've struggled with that word all the time. So that kind of sets the scene. The first mistake. What was the first mistake that they made? Well, the first mistake was Willie Boy Johnson. I don't know if you guys know about whatever happened with Willie Boy Johnson. He was, I think he was part American Indian. He was not Italian. Maybe his mother was, I'm not sure, but it didn't seem like he was Italian at all. He was never a made guy, and he was pretty important. He'd been a long time Gotti associate, had known him since he was a young man. He was known to be a good earner for Gotti and Della Croce too, and for the family. Giacalone wanted to turn Willie Boy because she knew him as 5558 TE, a top echelon informant is what that TE means. And so it turns out Willie Boy had gone to prison back in the 1960s, and nobody took care of his family in any manner, even though he'd always kicked up religiously to Della Croce and Gotti. Ms. Giacalone was pretty sure she could make him on the murder of a man named Tony Plate. She believed that Della Croce had ordered Willie Boy to do this murder down in Florida while he stayed in New York. Bureau agents had gone to Ms. Giacalone and asked that Willie Boy be removed from the indictment, or at least allowed to plead to the murder and get a lighter sentence and maybe deal with him on down the road so they could protect him. And there was another informant, top echelon informant, that they wanted to protect too. And she wouldn't protect either one of them. Mr. Gleason reports in his book that she replied that informants cannot be allowed to get away with murder, and she refused to deal. Now, as we know, Sammy the Bull was allowed to get away with a lot of murders, and there's been a lot of informants been allowed to basically get away with murder, maybe do a 5-year or 6-year bit. They may make them do a little time, but it's not, it's not huge time for the crimes that they've done. But the agents, they were hamstrung, there was nothing else they could do. Ms. Giacalone brings Willie Boy in for an interview, and what do you think he's going to do? Offers him witness protection. And, here's what he said. John Gotti's my friend. Here's something kind of interesting. I'm going to read off the exact words that Gleason's book had that he probably got from a transcript. Ms. Giacalone said, well, Mr. Johnson, the fact that you've been an FBI informant since 1966 will be made public in this case. He said, you can't do that. My whole family will be slaughtered. We're prepared to protect you. Willie Boy says, I don't really want your protection. Why are you doing this to me? I was promised nobody would ever know and nobody to ever tell about this. Now you're going to tell John? I never met you before. How could this happen? You can't do this to me. I'm going to be killed. My whole family's going to be killed. So Ms. Giacalone, and I've been in this position. Here's your choices, dude. You can cooperate. Your family goes into witness protection, and he would too. Or you could not cooperate. And I'll just tell the judge that you can be of help, and I want you to testify, and I want you to be held without bail in solitary confinement to protect your life. And she said, the Gotti crew will try to get you killed in jail. And if they can't get you killed in jail, as soon as you get out, they're going to try to kill you on the streets. Now, choice number 2, door number 2, you stay in the hole for a year. Then we try the case. And if you get convicted, they're going to get life for murdering Tony Plate. And then you'll have to spend the rest of your life in the hole for your own protection, because they'll always be looking to kill you even in prison, because it's coming out in court that you've been talking. But if you somehow beat your own case, the murder case for Tony Plate, John Gotti have you killed the moment you hit the street, even if he's away the rest of his life. So you only got one choice. Do a little time. We'll relocate you and your family. And, or you can go to trial, plead not guilty, don't help us, and you'll do life in the hole more than likely, and or get killed. Gleason writes, Willie Boy didn't even hesitate when he said softly, I will never testify against John Gotti. He's my friend. You can just take me back downstairs now. At a subsequent bail hearing, all the defendants and their lawyers are pleading for bail or asking for some kind of bail. Ms. Giacalone, in regards to Mr. Johnson, asked for no bail and said, the reason is, Your Honor, Mr. Johnson's been an informant for the Federal Bureau of Investigations for a period of over 15 years. I can't even imagine. The silence was deafening. How do you have a deafening silence? But a hush fell over the courtroom. I'd love to see inside the Gotti's head whenever that came out, and the rest of those guys too, but especially John Gotti's. Willie Boy jumps up and says, not true, Your Honor. I'm not an informant. I've talked to agents and everything, but I'm not an informant. Judge ends up saying, no, Mr. Johnson, I'm going to have you detained. And I'm afraid that you'll run from the jurisdiction if I release you. Well, needless to say, there was a lot of unhappy FBI agents. Boy, I know Bill Owsley had something like this happen to him with a U.S. attorney up in Minnesota, and he's still livid. I'd bring that up to him once in a while, and he'll just go off on a tirade. And especially if somebody really helped you a lot, and big time help, not just bullshit little help. Sometimes you get these guys that give you little things here and there and throw a little fish to you, but these guys that really give you big help, you got to try to do something for them. So, to prosecute RICO cases, the government has to have what they call predicate acts, and that's all these other crimes that some of these people have done. And then they have to prove that these people did these crimes, were part of an organization that got benefits from the acts that they did, like sports gambling or loan sharking. Say you got a sports gambling and loan sharking conviction, or you get one in the process of this trial, this RICO trial. And then you need a storyteller to say, then the Gambino crime family or Della Croce and Gotti got money out of this crime. So most of these predicate act cases, loan sharking and gambling and murder, whatever, they were FBI cases. And these agents will never really forgive Diane Giacalone for exposing their top echelon informants. It's hard to believe, but we'll talk a little more about this. But, taking this risk that she could end up forcing Willie Boy Johnson to testify against Gotti, she made a tactical error and also let the defendants know a lot more about their case, what the government knew about their case, and what they may be presenting in the future, because now they know what Willie Boy knows, and so what he's probably telling them. Huge error, I think, to try to expose him in order to try to make your case, because it didn't work. I guess it was, shooting dice. Sometimes you hit a 7, sometimes it's snake eyes. Second mistake was with the storytellers. There was a lot of the lawyers after this case, Bruce Cutler and Barry Slotnick, and I can't remember the other guy's name. They really went on and on with the media about what horrible people their witnesses were.
Was what? The jury just not believing the witnesses that testified against?
Absolutely. And rejecting, regurgitating the kind of thing that they've seen over and over again. Paid witnesses who've lied in the past, witnesses who've gotten new identities, witnesses who've sold drugs, witnesses who've killed people. They've had it. And I think this may be a swing in the right direction. I'm very pleased about that.
And Mr. Gotti?
So like I said, in the Rico case, you need storytellers. You got to have people to say, yeah, there's a mafia. Yeah, these people are part of a Gambino crime family. Yeah, Della Croce was the underboss, and Gotti was a capo of a crew under Della Croce. You got to get that organization out. Then you have to say, yeah, at times I and others that I know acted under their orders, and they got a tribute for my illegal earnings. So you got to get that out in front of a jury in order to prove Rico. So they had a set of degenerate characters, and you don't get witnesses, as they say. You don't get witnesses from Sunday school. There's no doubt about that. At least not witnesses in these kind of cases. Now, interesting, a guy I just talked to about coming on the show, I've got him recorded. I'm going to get him on. I'm going to get him on again because he's doing a thing with Netflix, and they're going to do another big show about this time in Manhattan, only from the criminal standpoint. The last one, Fear City, was from the police law enforcement standpoint. If you notice, this is going to be from the mob guys' view. There's so many mob guys that have come in. And yeah, his name is Sal Polisi. He was an associate that hung around the Bergen Fish and Hunt Club a lot. And he told me Diane Giacalone really wanted him just to come in and talk about the goings on inside the club. He was not really directly involved with any of this, really kind of had secondhand information. Now, he had turned informant and already gone to witness protection, and he testified against a corrupt New York State judge he had bribed from a narcotics case that he had. But he's a colorful character, as you'll hear when I get him on the show, and he's quite a storyteller. One thing about him that was killing him, to use him as a witness, and he didn't have any direct information, was he had already gained a reputation as being crazy, and he'd used an insanity defense in a 1974 case. He also had feigned insanity to the Veterans Administration and collected over $300,000 over the past 20 years. Hope he didn't say he had PTSD and get a lot of money. There's probably people that do that more than likely. I got a buddy that, I don't know, he claims he's got PTSD and he's got a full pension from, full disability from the military. Maybe he does. I don't know. Who am I to say? But at the time, Sal Polisi was also writing a book, and he taped hundreds of hours of his memories. Well, the defense were able to get hold of these recorded conversations, and they really did not sound good as far as who he was and what he was. And they also contained a lot of racist language. He dropped the N-word a lot, which, and from guy to guy, and especially in that world, you do. But on the streets, you get somebody in to discredit him and get somebody to say, yeah, he's known as Sally Ubats or Crazy Sally. I thought crazy was Pazzo, but what I read in Gleason's book was Sally Ubats. So the defense was pretty was able to pretty easily discredit Polisi. And the next one, Matt Trainer, he was a real mistake for many reasons. That guy was a piece of work. The prosecution didn't even use him. He was so bad. But the prosecution had to reveal that they had interviewed him and tried to use him. And so when they learned about it, they have an investigator go out and talk to Trainer, and then they realized they could use him to discredit the prosecutors. Trainer will, on the stand, they'll call him on the stand. He'll claim that Diane Giacalone tried to bribe him by saying that she put money in his commissary accounts and get him other little goodies because he was in jail at the time. And he even claimed that she gave him some of her panties to help him relieve himself sexually in jail. He said that Diane Giacalone, and he called her Mama Giacalone, and for some reason the judge allowed it, but he always called her that on the stand. And she told him, according to Trainer, that she would do anything to get the Gotti crew, because when she was a young girl, she often had to walk past the Bergen Fish and Hunt Club, and they made crude and lewd remarks to her and about her, which we know she did grow up in that neighborhood. He also said John Gleason's wife was a nurse. They learned a little bit about Gleason and said she was a nurse, and she had provided Gleason Tylenol 3 with codeine to get to him in the jail in exchange for perjured testimony. And the defense had even subpoenaed Ms. Gleason's personnel file from the hospital to see if she had ever been in any kind of trouble in regards to her handling of narcotics. Oh, this Gleason, oh man, he was just livid. He was, and can you imagine, that bringing your wife into this deal? But he was beside himself. Now, one of the murders that they're going to use was the murder of Jimmy McBratney. Now, Gotti had done that murder with Angelo Ruggiero, and McBratney was a big Irish guy who, with some other guys, had kidnapped Carlo Gambino's nephew, I believe. I think they'd kidnapped other Gambino family people and held them for ransom, and they'd accidentally or somehow they killed Carlo Gambino's nephew in the midst of one of these kidnappings. He had ordered Del Croce to make sure it got taken care of, that McBratney got taken care of, and he, of course, handed it down to Gotti, and Ruggiero did it, and they got caught, and they copped a plea. Now, they'd obviously, I know they used Roy Cohen. I don't know exactly how, but they used Roy Cohen to get some kind of a sweet deal. They did a 3-year bit for murdering McBratney. They probably claimed some kind of self-defense or something. I don't know. So one of the Irishmen who hung around and did these kidnappings with McBratney was a guy named Eddie Maloney. And he'd come into the government for protection after he was shot in the head several times in the Cozy Corner bar in Queens. And it was run by a member of Gotti's crew. And this was, because he was part of this kidnapping thing, they were trying to kill him for that too. And Gleason reports that he got him on the stand and he asked him about this and how, they tried to kill him. And he said, yeah, well, where'd they shoot you? He said, well, right in the head. And he said, well, how'd you survive that? And he said, well, it only went in about this far. And Gleason said he was really slow and difficult to prepare and really had hardly anything that was admissible against these defendants. Plus, he just looked like what are you doing with this guy, And had another guy, James Cardinale. He traded off a murder for a manslaughter plea. And he could only testify that he'd been a regular at the Bergen Hunt and Fish Club for several years. And he started claiming things like, he said, well, Gotti told me that he killed the kidnapper of Manny Gambino, which he did. And he took a guilty plea on that. He said that Willie Boy Johnson, this is how he made the case on Willie Boy Johnson. He had said that he'd killed this Tony Plate. He said John Carnelia had confessed that he'd done a murder. So, there was murder charges that he's testifying that, yeah, they're talking about these murders. They admitted doing these murders. But his word was totally unsubstantiated. And when they started attacking him on the stand, they said, well, show me what surveillance report or photo that he's in. He was just a nothing. Gotti would say he was just he was just a fucking coffee boy in the club and kind of a periphery hanger-oner. And they painted him as that. They were able to paint him as that. And Gleason believes that the jury would not believe that he was important enough for anybody to discuss murders with. The third mistake, we've alluded to this. Ms. Giacalone, primarily Ms. Giacalone, Gleason didn't have anything to do with this. He's the guy that prosecuted Gotti and won the case in the second trial. But she alienated law enforcement. In one case, they had a retired NYPD detective named Vic Ruggiero, and he'd helped the Bergen wiretaps, and started calling him getting ready for trial, and he wasn't returning their call. And it turns out that when he was on the stand before during some preliminary hearings, one of Gotti's lawyers addressed him as Mr. rather than detective. Well, he was retired, but he got scared, and they couldn't bring him back around. He was scared, and he believed that was a signal letting him know that he was no longer protected as a cop. Giacalone went to the judge for a subpoena to force him to testify, and the judge says, well, you know how unusual this is? And he says, you really need to arrest a former NYPD detective in order to get him to testify about an investigation he conducted. He said, what's wrong with this case? And there was a lot of little things wrong with this case. It probably had overstretched by the government, but they wanted these prosecutions bad. Of course, the exposure of Willie Boy Johnson as a top echelon informant, that really alienated him. That really alienated him. And the FBI wouldn't even return their calls, and they wouldn't help the prosecution in any manner. And before the trial was over, it got even worse. Lots of times an FBI agent will sit there and help second chair help sit up there with the prosecutor if they don't have another lawyer to second chair it, because most FBI agents, awful lot of them are lawyers too. But for example, they need an FBI agent to testify at a hearing that they never authorized Willie Boy Johnson, or there's another top echelon informant witness. They never authorized them to commit any criminal acts during the time they were feeding the FBI information as top echelon informants. So after many calls, they finally got one agent to testify. But, then on cross-examination, somehow, and this is how bad it got, somebody within the FBI had given the defense inside information about this agent that testified. They'd never given them permission to do criminal acts. And he had once been demoted for improperly disseminating confidential information provided by an informant. So, that just blows you up. That just blows you right out of the water there. That just really discredits you as any kind of a witness that would be claiming anything about informants. And, so they said, of course, this guy's lying. When he testifies that he hadn't told the informers to commit crime. And I think many times I think people do believe that agents and even policemen will tell people to commit crimes and then tell them they'll cover for them. And, it's always understood that, I always just tell guys that, if I know you're doing stuff, if you get caught, I'll do what I can, but I don't want to know anything about it. And you're a big boy, but I wish you wouldn't do it, but I can't control you. So that's, what are you going to do? Fourth and final mistake. I tell you what, jury selection. I don't know if you know much about what happened with the jury on this, but, and it's weird that this will be a mistake, because it looked like they were doing the right thing. This prosecution had two jury selections. The first one was going to be an open jury selection, and that means that during voir dire, that's when they question the jurors, the prospective jurors, the defense will be given a list of the prospective jurors and their addresses, and they'll be able to learn a lot about the jurors, usually because that's what you want to know about the jurors. If you're selecting a jury, you want to find out, where they live and and maybe go back and even check, as much as you can, check their background. As the jury selection progressed, they realized that these people were petrified of testifying in this trial, especially of Gotti. It said several of the women and the men even burst into tears just as the questioning started, the voir dire started. So go figure. I don't know. I don't think I'd burst into tears, but here's what they did do, and I think this was the biggest tip-off. They'd give a quick look over at Gotti before they answered any questions. So is he listening? Is he watching? And the body language gives you away every time. So when they saw that was going on, they convinced the judge to suspend the election process and start with a whole new panel. And this time the jury was going to be anonymous. And they started with a huge panel, I think like 500 people. And it took 5 weeks to get a jury together. And they were only known by their number. And that means both the prosecution and the defense didn't know their name or their address or anything else about them. They were given a questionnaire that contained a lot of the usual voir dire questions. Have you ever been a witness? Do you know any of the defendants or the prosecutors? Do you have any connection to law enforcement? Have you ever been questioned by the FBI? Have you ever been a defendant? Have you ever been convicted of a crime? Have you ever been accused of a crime? Do you know anything about this case? Do you know anything about, the names of the lawyers and the prosecutors and the defendants? Do you know any of these people? Any of the other witnesses? Probably give them a list of most of the other witnesses. Do you know any of these people? I had some comic relief during this. They had one woman, when she was answered the question about if she's ever testified in court before, she said yes. So the judge gets her in and then says, well, what about this case? What did you testify about? And she said, well, it was about the murder of my husband. The judge says, well, I'm sorry. It must have been a very horrible experience for you. But how were you a witness? What, did you see him being murdered? Or why were you a witness? She said, because I'm the one who did it. They let her go. Both sides agreed, we don't want her as a witness. But with all these precautions, a jury member slipped through unnoticed. A man named George Pape became juror number 11. Now, in hindsight, had everybody known the names of the jurors and something about them, their address, juror 11 probably would have been exposed because he told several lies during the questioning, during the forum and everything, and any follow-up questions they might have. For example, he had claimed he had never testified in a trial before, when in fact he'd testified for a particular professional criminal several times. He owned a business in partnership with this same man who was well known by these prosecutors. He had visited this guy in prison 40 times, was on the prison registration. He'd signed the guy's papers for his naturalization process. He was best man at this guy's wedding. But since neither the defense nor the prosecution knew the names of any of the jurors, they were all anonymous, they couldn't check the background of Mr. Pape. And of course, during deliberations, he vociferously argued for not guilty verdicts for the defendants. So how did this come out? Well, Sammy the Bull, good old our friend Sammy the Bull Gravano, our competition out there in the YouTube channel. Now, he has a good channel. I tell you what, the guy can tell a story. But I'm not going to start calling people bro. Hey, bro. That's right, bro. Anyhow, he told the agents that he had paid $60,000 to a Serbian criminal who was connected to the Westie gang in Manhattan. Well, it sounds kind of strange, but I tell you, this guy, I'm going to tell you a little bit about this guy. It's truth is stranger than fiction many times. The agent told Gleason, this is how this went down, that when they started debriefing Sammy's, I guess there's a victory party at the Ravenite after this not guilty verdict, or these not guilty verdicts for Gotti, Gene Gotti, and all of them. And at the party, it seems there are a lot of people congratulating Sammy about the victory. And they said, well, why is that? Sammy says, simple, bro, I fixed it. Gleason writes in his book that he remembered a call after the trial, after the not guilty verdict came in. A New York detective who had testified called him, and he said, juror number 11, they called him the oil terminal guy because he worked at an oil terminal. They figured that out somehow. called him and wanted to talk. And detective said, I'm going to go out and talk to him. Police said, okay, tell me what he's got to say. And detective met with juror number 11, and he was drunker than hell. And he said he didn't really say anything that made any sense. He didn't know what he wanted. It turns out Sammy the Bull relates this story. There's a Serbian criminal named Bosko Radanovic, and he was one of those people that just, his story is something else. He had been a Serbian terrorist during the troubles over there, if you remember the little war. We got involved, sent some planes over there back in the early 80s. This is the middle to later 80s. And he'd come over to the United States. He'd hooked up with Gotti somehow, who had put him in charge of the Westies after Jimmy Coonan went to prison. Now, if you don't know, the Westies is an Irish gang, goes clear back to Oni Madden and Jimmy Coonan and Mickey Featherstone went on, and they were really violent. They had a deal with the Gambinos and to do crime under the auspices of the Gambinos. And of course, they fenced everything through them and probably kicked a little tribute to them. And they were involved in the construction rackets, and Bosco, his name was mentioned many times in Ravenite, and as being important in the construction rackets that the Gambino crime family had. The construction rackets, Sammy the Bull was pouring all the concrete in Manhattan, and they owned the unions there, and you really had to deal with the Gambinos in order to get buildings built. And I think everybody had to deal with the Gambinos if you were going to do any construction in Manhattan. They knew Bosco was closely connected to them in that manner. And so it didn't take really great detective work to check into juror number 11's background and find that he knew Bosco well, had visited him in jail many times, had testified for him, had signed his naturalization papers, was the best man at his wedding, and on and on. And he would have been knocked out before any of that happened, because they would have caught him lying on the jury questionnaire, the early question. Because believe me, these guys, if you got their names and addresses, you're going to go run them through the system and find out. The intelligence system, they're going to have, his name was George Pape, by the way, if I didn't say that before. You're going to have Pape's name down there as his license plate showing up or somehow showing up next to this Bosko Radanovic. And Radanovic was well known to be an Gotti associate. So that was a mistake they made, was asking for that anonymous jury. The government will end up charging George Pape, convict him for taking a $60,000 bribe to fix that verdict. Now, Gravano never met Pape. He stayed back from this. He only gave the money in what he said, $3 $20,000 installments to Bosco to get this fixed. So that's the 4 mistakes that the government made in the first Gotti trial that gave him the moniker of the Teflon Don. I hope you like this story. I appreciate all of y'all. Don't forget, as I said before, to subscribe and or like and subscribe and share and tell your friends about the YouTube channel or the audio channel if you're on the audio channel. Don't forget, I ride motorcycles, and boy, we just had a really bad one. Some of these guys in the sport bikes that get together, and you've seen them, they stunt and they ride about 1,000 miles an hour. I don't ride with them, but I like to watch their Facebook page. And just yesterday, they had one of their guys killed racing with another guy within a group. They had a big group of 20, and everybody scattered like a covey of quail after these 2 motorcycles went down, and one of them was killed. They were berating each other on Facebook for leaving the scene. Somebody said, cops don't care about your improper license or whether you got a license plate on it or you got insurance on your bike or not. When they're dealing with an injury accident like that, don't leave your buddies stranded laying on the highway, but they scattered like quail. So if you're a veteran, you got a problem with PTSD, be sure and go to the Veterans Administration website, get that hotline number and give them a call. Thanks a lot, folks. Thanks a lot, folks. Thanks a lot, folks. Thanks a lot, folks.